The stars had always been beautiful from the bridge of the Valiant. Commander Elena Hart had spent 15 years looking at them, first as a young pilot, then as a captain, and finally as the commander of Earth's finest warship. She had seen nebulas that looked like paintings and planets that glowed like jewels in the darkness. But tonight, the stars brought only death. The Varaxian fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metal locusts. There were hundreds of them, each ship larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their dreadnoughts blocked out the stars themselves, casting shadows across the moon. Elena watched them come and felt her heart grow cold. "All hands to battle stations," she said into the ship's communication system. Her voice was calm and steady, even though her hands were shaking. A good commander never showed fear. "This is not a drill." Repeat, this is not a drill. The bridge crew moved with quick efficiency. They had trained for this moment, though none of them had truly believed it would come. First contact with alien life was supposed to be a moment of wonder and discovery. Instead, it was a moment of terror. Lieutenant Kevin Park looked up from his sensor station. His face was pale. "Commander, I'm counting over 300 enemy vessels. They're surrounding the planet." Elena nodded slowly. Earth's defense fleet consisted of 42 ships. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely unprepared for an enemy of this magnitude. But they would fight anyway. That was what humans did. "Open a channel to the fleet," she ordered. "All ships are to engage defensive formation around Earth. We hold the line for as long as possible. Evacuation shuttles need time to launch." The battle began with fire and fury. The Valiant's weapons blazed against the darkness, striking enemy ships with everything they had. For a brief moment, Elena allowed herself to hope. Human weapons were doing damage. Varaxian ships were exploding. Then the enemy started shooting back. The first wave of Varaxian fire cut through Earth's fleet like a hot knife through butter. Ships that Elena had served with for years vanished in bowls of flame. The Defender was gone in seconds. The Unity lasted slightly longer before breaking apart. Escape pods scattered like seeds in the wind, only to be picked off by smaller enemy fighters. "Shields at 40%, reported Park. His voice cracked with fear. "We've lost contact with half the fleet." Elena gripped the arms of her command chair. "Keep firing. Every second we buy is another shuttle that escapes." The Valiant fought with desperate courage. Her crew performed beyond their limits, pushing the ship harder than it was ever designed to go. They destroyed 17 enemy vessels before the Varaxians finally focused their attention on them. The impact threw Elena from her chair. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the red glow of emergency power. She could hear screaming from somewhere in the ship, mixed with the terrible groan of metal being torn apart. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, someone shouted. "We're losing atmosphere." "Seal those sections," Elena ordered, pulling herself back to her feet. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead, but she ignored it. "Continue firing." But there was nothing left to fire with. The Valiant's weapons were destroyed. Her engines were failing. She drifted in space like a wounded animal. Surrounded by the wreckage of humanity's greatest fleet, the Varaxian boarding parties came next. Elena armed herself with a plasma pistol and led her remaining crew in a desperate defense of the ship. They fought through corridors filled with smoke and blood. The Varaxian soldiers were tall, nearly 7 feet, with silver skin that seemed to absorb light. Their armor was black and their weapons fired bolts of pure energy. One by one, Elena's crew fell. She watched Kevin Park die trying to protect the engine room. She saw her first officer, Commander Elisa Chun, dragged away by 3 Varaxian soldiers. She fought until her pistol was empty, then fought with her fists and feet and teeth. It was not enough. They captured her on the bridge, surrounded by the bodies of her crew. 4 Varaxians held her down, while a 5th placed heavy metal restraints on her wrists. She struggled and cursed and spat at them, but they did not react. They simply lifted her like she weighed nothing and carried her toward the enemy shuttle. The Varaxian flagship was called the Throne of Conquest. It was larger than most cities, a floating mountain of metal and power. Elena was brought through endless corridors lined with trophies from 1,000 conquered worlds. She saw flags and weapons and strange objects she could not identify. Each one represented a species that had fallen before the Varaxian Empire. They brought her to a throne room at the heart of the ship. The ceiling rose so high that it disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered with screens showing the destruction of Earth's defenses. And at the center of it all, sitting on a throne made of some dark metal, was the Alpha King. Calther was unlike the other Varaxians. He was taller, broader, and his silver skin had a faint golden glow. His eyes were the color of molten metal, and when they fixed on Elena, she felt like he was looking straight into her soul. "Bring her closer," he commanded. His voice was deep and powerful, filling the entire room. The guards pushed Elena forward until she stood at the base of his throne. She was covered in blood and dirt and sweat. Her uniform was torn. Her body ached from a dozen wounds. But she stood straight and met his eyes without looking away. Calther studied her with open curiosity. "You are the commander of that ship," he said. It was not a question. "You fought well. Your species fights better than most." "We're not finished fighting," Elena replied. The Alpha King smiled, showing teeth that were slightly pointed. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your planet is surrounded. Your species will submit to Varaxian rule within the week. The fighting is over." He stood from his throne and walked down the steps toward her. Each footstep echoed through the silent room. His guards watched with expressions of religious awe. This was their God King, the ruler of 1,000 worlds, and he was giving his attention to a single human prisoner. "You interest me," Calther said, stopping just in front of her. He towered over her by more than a foot, but Elena refused to step back. "There is fire in your eyes. Spirit, I have not seen such defiance in centuries." He reached out and lifted her chin with one finger, forcing her to look up at him. His touch was surprisingly gentle. "You will serve me," he declared. "I claim you as my war prize. You will stand at my side and learn what it means to be part of a true empire." Elena jerked her chin away from his touch. She looked into his ancient, powerful eyes and spoke clearly. "I don't belong to you," she said. The Alpha King ignored her words and took control of the situation. He gestured to his guards, who immediately moved to obey. "Take her to my personal quarters. See that she is cleaned and fed. She will learn her place in time." As they dragged her away, Elena heard him laugh softly behind her. He had conquered civilizations older than humanity. He had broken species that considered themselves gods. One defiant human female was nothing more than an amusing challenge. He had no idea what he had just brought into his empire. He had no idea that this single human woman would be the spark that burned his throne to ashes. But Elena knew. Even as the guards pulled her through the corridors, she was already planning, already watching, already learning. The war was not over. It was just beginning. 3 weeks passed aboard the Throne of Conquest. 3 weeks of captivity in golden chains. 3 weeks of the Alpha King watching her with those burning eyes, waiting for her to break. Elena refused to break. The quarters they had given her were larger than her entire apartment back on Earth. The walls were decorated with strange artwork from dozens of different worlds. The bed was soft, and the food was plentiful. There were servants who came 3 times a day to attend to her needs. By Varaxian standards, she was being treated like royalty. but the door was locked from the outside. The window showed only the endless darkness of space. And around her neck, hidden beneath her collar, was a thin metal band that would deliver a painful shock if she tried to leave without permission. She was a prisoner in a beautiful cage. The Alpha King visited her every evening. He would sit across from her and ask questions about humanity. He wanted to know about Earth's history, its cultures, its wars. Elena answered carefully, giving him just enough information to keep him interested, while revealing nothing that could be used against her people. "Your species is young," Kelther said one night, swirling a glass of wine the color of blood. "You have only been among the stars for 2 centuries. The Varaxian Empire has ruled for 12,000 years. And yet here you are," Elena replied, "still conquering, still fighting. If your empire is so perfect, why do you need to keep expanding?" His eyes narrowed slightly. No one spoke to him like this. No one challenged his words or questioned his rule. The servants and soldiers around him treated him like a living god. Elena treated him like an equal, or perhaps less than equal. "We expand because it is our nature," he said. "The strong rule. The weak serve. This is the law of the universe." "That's not a law. That's an excuse." Kelther leaned forward, studying her face. "You truly believe your species can resist us? Even now, with your fleet destroyed and your planet under our control, you believe you can win?" Elena met his gaze without flinching. "I know we can win. You've never fought humans before. You don't understand what we're capable of." He laughed at that, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the room. But there was something uncertain in his eyes, something that had not been there before. During the days when the Alpha King was busy with his empire, Elena explored her cage. She learned the patterns of the guards who watched her door. She memorized the faces of the servants who brought her food. She listened to their conversations, picking up words and phrases in the Varaxian language. The servants were not all Varaxian. Most of them belonged to conquered species. Small gray creatures with large eyes, tall thin beings with blue skin, furry humanoids who never spoke above a whisper. They moved through the ship like ghosts, invisible to their masters. Elena started talking to them. At first, they were terrified. Speaking to a war prize was forbidden. But Elena was patient and gentle. She asked their names and remembered them. She thanked them for their service and inquired about their lives. Small kindnesses that cost her nothing but meant everything to beings who had been treated as less than animals for generations. A servant named Kira was the first to truly trust her. Kira belonged to a species called the Delany, conquered by the Varaxians over 2,000 years ago. She was old by her people's standards, her gray skin wrinkled, and her large eyes clouded with age. "Why do you care?" Kira asked one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are a prisoner, like us. What can you possibly do?" Elena smiled gently. "I can listen. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's how everything changes." Kira looked at her for a long moment. Then she began to talk. She told Elena about her people's history, about the day the Varaxians came, about the generations of suffering that followed. She spoke of resistance movements that had risen and fallen, of heroes who had been executed, of hope that had slowly died. "We stopped fighting long ago," Kira admitted. "It was easier to submit, easier to survive. But you're not really living," Elena said softly. "You're just existing. There's a difference." Word spread among the servants. The human prisoner was different. She listened. She cared. She treated them like people instead of property. More and more of them found excuses to visit her quarters, to exchange a few words, to remember what it felt like to be seen. Elena learned something important from these conversations. The Varaxian Empire was not as strong as it appeared. It was held together by fear and tradition, not by loyalty or love. The Alpha King ruled because no one dared to challenge him, not because anyone truly believed in his cause. There were cracks in the foundation, fractures that had been ignored for centuries. All they needed was the right pressure to break wide open. She began to gather information. Guard rotations, ship layouts, communication frequencies. She memorized everything the servants told her and pieced it together like a puzzle. The picture that emerged was both terrifying and hopeful. The Alpha King had 12,000 ships under his command. His empire spanned 3 galaxies. His army numbered in the billions. No single world could hope to defeat such power, but his empire was spread thin. Most of his forces were occupied with suppressing rebellions on distant worlds. The occupation of Earth was handled by a relatively small force, confident that humanity had been broken. They were wrong. Kelthar noticed the change in her. She seemed more relaxed, more patient. She stopped arguing with him and started asking questions instead. He interpreted this as submission, as the beginning of her acceptance. "You are adapting," he said one evening, something like approval in his voice. "This is wise. Those who adapt survive. Those who resist are destroyed." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the strong ruling and the weak serving. Maybe you're right. Maybe that is the way of the universe. You accept this?" "I'm starting to understand it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I wonder if you truly understand it yourself." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "You think strength is about weapons and armies, about conquering and controlling. But that's not real strength. That's just force. Real strength is about inspiring people to follow you willingly, about building something that lasts because people believe in it, not because they fear it." Kelthar was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the stars. "I have ruled for 400 years, he said quietly. "I have conquered more worlds than I can count. Every species I have encountered has either submitted or been destroyed. Your words are pretty, but they are meaningless. Power is the only truth. Then why are you still fighting?" Elena asked. "If power is all that matters, if your empire is truly strong, why hasn't the fighting stopped? Why are there still rebellions on distant worlds? Why do your own servants hate you?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You speak dangerous words. I speak the truth. You can ignore it if you want. You can pretend that everything is fine, that your empire will last forever. But deep down, you know I'm right. You can feel it. The foundation is cracking." For a moment, something flickered in his ancient eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. But then it was gone, replaced by cold certainty. "You are clever," he admitted. "More clever than I expected. But cleverness alone cannot defeat me. I have crushed rebellions led by beings far older and wiser than you." Elena smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "We'll see." That night, after he left, she accessed a hidden communication device that Kira had smuggled into her quarters. It was crude and limited, but it was enough to send a message to Earth. A message that contained everything she had learned. Ship positions, defense codes, patrol schedules, everything the Resistance would need to begin fighting back. The message ended with 3 words that would change the course of history. "We are ready." The ruins of Chicago had become humanity's secret heart. Beneath the broken towers and crumbling streets, in tunnels that once carried trains, the Resistance gathered and grew. Lieutenant Nathan Cole stood before a flickering holographic display, studying the data that had arrived from Commander Hart. His face was thin and tired, marked by months of hiding and fighting. But his eyes burned with fierce determination. This is everything we need, he said to the assembled cell leaders. Ship positions, patrol schedules, communication frequencies. She's given us a complete map of their weaknesses. Captain Maya Santos leaned forward to study the display. She had survived the initial invasion by crashing her damaged fighter into Lake Michigan and swimming to shore. Now she commanded what remained of Earth's air forces, a ragged collection of hidden aircraft and brave pilots. It's too good, she said quietly. How do we know this isn't a trap? The Varaxians could be feeding us false information. I verified 3 of these patrol routes myself, Nathan replied. The information is accurate. Commander Hart is risking her life to help us. Another voice spoke from the shadows. Then we need to use it. Every day we wait, more humans die. More of our people are shipped off to work in their mines and factories. We cannot afford to be cautious anymore. The speaker stepped forward. Her name was Rosa Martinez, and she led the largest civilian resistance network in North America. Before the invasion, she had been a school teacher. Now she was a warrior. I agree, Nathan said. But we need to be smart about this. One big attack won't win this war. We need to hit them in 100 places at once. Make them realize that they haven't conquered anything. They've just stepped into a hornet's nest. The planning took weeks. Messages were sent through hidden channels to resistance cells across the planet. In Europe, scattered military units began coordinating for the first time since the invasion. In Asia, factory workers sabotaged Varaxian equipment. In Africa and South America, guerrilla fighters prepared ambush on isolated enemy patrols. Humanity was waking up. Nathan spent long hours studying the intelligence from Commander Hart. The more he learned about the Varaxian Empire, the more he understood its weaknesses. Their technology was superior, but it was old and unchanged for centuries. They had grown comfortable, complacent. They expected conquered species to submit and stay submitted. They had never faced a species like humanity before. Their occupation force is surprisingly small, Nathan explained during one planning session. Less than 50,000 soldiers for the entire planet. They're relying on fear and their orbiting ships to keep us controlled. Why so few? Rosa asked. Because they don't take us seriously. They think we're broken. They think the destruction of our fleet ended the war. Nathan smiled grimly. They're about to learn how wrong they are. Captain Santos had been working on another problem, rebuilding humanity's space capability. Hidden in secret locations around the world were the pieces of something unprecedented, a fleet built in shadows. We've salvaged parts from crashed ships, she reported. Both ours and theirs. We've built new vessels in underground factories, trained pilots in simulators hidden in the mountains. It's not much, but it's enough to give them a bloody nose. How many ships? Nathan asked. 37 combat ready. Another 50 that can fly, but won't last long in a fight. She paused. It's not enough to defeat their fleet. But combined with the intelligence from Commander Hart, it might be enough to hurt them badly. The attack was planned for the 1-year anniversary of the invasion, a symbolic date that would remind every human on Earth that they had not forgotten, had not surrendered, had not given up hope. Meanwhile, aboard the throne of conquest, Elena continued her quiet war. The servants had become her network, her eyes and ears throughout the ship. Through them, she learned things that no prisoner should know. She learned about supply shortages in distant sectors of the empire. She learned about commanders who were growing weary of endless conquest. She learned about ancient grudges between Varaxian noble houses. Most importantly, she learned that she was not alone in her defiance. Kira brought her to a secret meeting in the ship's lower maintenance tunnels. There, in the darkness between massive power conduits, Elena met representatives from a dozen conquered species. They were frightened and suspicious, but they listened when she spoke. I know you've been conquered for generations, she said softly. I know you've learned to keep your heads down and survive. But survival is not the same as living. And the empire that enslaved you is weaker than it looks. Adelon the Elder shook his head. We have heard such words before. Many times. They always end in blood and chains. This time is different, Elena insisted. My people are fighting back. On Earth, right now, humans are preparing to strike. We're not asking you to risk everything on a single battle. We're asking you to be ready. When the moment comes, when the Varaxians are distracted and desperate, that's when you act. And when will this moment come? Another voice asked. Elena smiled. Soon, sooner than you think. She sent another message to Earth that night, coded and hidden in routine data transmissions. The message contained her latest intelligence and something more, a timeline. The anniversary attack on Earth would create chaos. The Varaxian fleet would be forced to respond, pulling ships away from other duties. At that moment, Elena would make her move aboard the flagship. If everything went according to plan, the Alpha King would find himself surrounded by enemies on all sides. Nathan received the message in his underground bunker. He read it 3 times, then shared it with his fellow leaders. She's gonna start a rebellion on the flagship itself, Maya said, her voice filled with wonder. One woman, surrounded by enemies, and she's going to turn them against each other. She's not alone, Nathan corrected. She's built a network. She's turned servants and slaves into allies. That's what makes her dangerous. Not weapons or strength, but the ability to inspire others. Rosa nodded slowly. My grandmother used to say that empires fall from within. The Varaxians conquered our world, but they never conquered our hearts. Commander Hart understands this. She's fighting a war they don't even know is happening. The weeks before the anniversary were tense and quiet. On Earth, resistance fighters moved into position. In space, the hidden fleet prepared for launch. Aboard the throne of conquest, Elena made her final preparations. Kelthar sensed that something was wrong. He visited her more frequently, watching her with those ancient golden eyes. He asked questions that seemed casual, but were really probes, searching for signs of deception. You seem distracted, he observed one evening. Your mind is elsewhere. Elena shrugged. I'm thinking about the future. About what happens next. What do you believe happens next? She met his gaze steadily. Change. Everything changes. Even empires that have lasted 12,000 years. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You still believe your species can resist. After everything you've seen, after all the power I've shown you, you still think you can win. I don't think we can win, Elena said quietly. I know we will. The Alpha King stood and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his back to her. I have enjoyed our conversations, he said, his voice strangely soft. You are unlike anyone I have ever met. It will be a shame when I have to break you. You can't break me, Elena replied. No one can. That's what you don't understand about humans. We bend, but we don't break. We fall, but we get back up. Every time you push us down, we come back stronger. He turned to look at her one last time. We shall see. The door closed behind him. Elena waited until his footsteps faded, then moved to the hidden communication device. She sent one final message to Earth. 3 words that would echo through history. The time is now. The attack began at midnight, Earth time. Across the planet, in 17 different locations. The resistance struck simultaneously. Nathan Cole led the assault on the Varaxian command center in what had once been Washington, D.C. His team of 40 fighters moved through the ruins like shadows, avoiding patrols using the intelligence Elena had provided. They reached the outer perimeter without raising a single alarm. Remember, Nathan whispered through his communication device, we hit them hard and fast. destroy the communication arrays first. Without those, they can't coordinate their response. The first explosions lit up the night sky. Charges planted weeks earlier detonated along the perimeter wall, creating gaps for the fighters to pour through. Varaxian guards, caught completely by surprise, scrambled for their weapons. They were too slow. Nathan led the charge personally, his plasma rifle blazing. The guards fell before they could organize a defense. Within minutes, the outer compound was secure. "Move to the communication tower," he ordered. "Go, go, go!" Around the world, similar scenes played out. In London, resistance fighters captured a supply depot filled with Varaxian weapons. In Tokyo, saboteurs destroyed a power station that supplied energy to the occupation forces. In Cairo, a team of engineers hijacked enemy communication satellites. The Varaxians woke to chaos. Commander Vextar, the military governor of Earth, stood in his command center and watched the reports flood in. Red lights blinked across his holographic map, each one representing an attack or incident. "How is this possible?" he demanded. Our patrols reported no signs of organized resistance. His officers had no answer. They had been told that Earth was pacified, but the humans were broken. They had grown comfortable in their conquest. Certain that nothing could challenge Varaxian supremacy, they had been very, very wrong. "Signal the fleet," Vextar ordered. "I want every available ship moved to suppress these attacks. And find out how they knew our positions and schedules. Someone has been feeding them information." In orbit above Earth, the Varaxian fleet began to move. Ships that had been spread out to maintain control of the entire planet now converged on the sites of the largest attacks. It was exactly what the Resistance had been hoping for. Captain Maya Santos watched from the command chair of the Resilience. Hidden in the shadow of an asteroid belt near Mars, the rebuilt human fleet waited with her. 37 ships crewed by pilots who had trained for this moment in secret. "They're taking the bait," her tactical officer reported. "The enemy fleet is concentrating over North America and Europe. Their formation is breaking." Maya nodded. "Signal all ships. Attack pattern Delta. We hit their support vessels first, then their communication ships. Make them blind and deaf before they know what's happening." The human fleet emerged from hiding and accelerated toward Earth at maximum speed. They were outnumbered 5-1, but they had surprise and desperation on their side. And they had something else. The detailed intelligence that Elena Hart had provided, showing every weakness in the Varaxian formation. The first Varaxian ships died before they even knew they were under attack. Human missiles, guided by codes that should have been impossible to obtain, slipped through shields and detonated inside critical systems. Communication vessels exploded, cutting off entire squadrons from Central Command. "The humans have ships," Vextar said, his voice filled with disbelief. "That's impossible. We destroyed their fleet." "We destroyed the fleet we knew about," one of his officers replied grimly. "They built another one. In secret." The battle for Earth had begun, aboard the throne of conquest. Alpha King Cal watched the reports with growing anger. His personal flagship was positioned far from Earth, overseeing operations in a distant sector of the Empire. But the news reached him within the hour. "The humans are fighting back," his senior advisor reported. "They've launched a coordinated attack across their planet and destroyed over 40 of our ships. Our forces are struggling to contain the situation." Calther said nothing. His golden eyes burned with cold fury. "There is something else," the advisor continued hesitantly. "Our analysts believe the humans received inside information. The precision of their attacks suggests they knew our positions and codes in advance." "Find the source," Calther commanded. "Find it and destroy it." But the source was closer than he imagined. In her quarters, aboard his own flagship, Elena Hart was already making her move. The servant network she had built over months swung into action. In the engine room, Delaney workers began subtly sabotaging power systems. In the armory, members of conquered species misdirected weapon shipments. In the communication center, sympathetic operators delayed critical messages. Elena herself moved through the ship using access codes that servants had stolen for her. She was no longer a prisoner in her golden cage. She was a ghost, invisible and dangerous. Her first target was the shield generator control room. 2 guards stood outside, unaware that anything was wrong. Elena approached them calmly, wearing the uniform of a Varaxian officer that Kira had obtained for her. "The Alpha King requires your presence in the throne room," she said, keeping her voice steady. The guards exchanged confused looks. "We have received no such orders." "The orders came through personal channels. There is an emergency. Your commander will explain." It was a thin lie, but it worked. The guards hurried away, eager to respond to their king's summons. Elena slipped into the control room and went to work. She did not destroy the shield generators. That would be too obvious. Instead, she made small changes to the calibration, weakening the shields by just enough to matter. When the time came, the throne of conquest would be vulnerable. Similar acts of sabotage occurred throughout the ship. None were dramatic enough to trigger alarms, but together they transformed the mightiest vessel in the Varaxian fleet into a floating trap. Calthor sensed that something was wrong. He stalked through his ship, his golden eyes searching for the source of his unease. Guards snapped to attention as he passed. Servants pressed themselves against walls. Terrified of attracting his attention, he found Elena in an observation gallery, watching stars that had once seemed eternal. "You have been busy," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My security officers report strange patterns throughout the ship. Small malfunctions, delayed communications, guards sent to wrong locations." Elena turned to face him. She was done hiding, done pretending. "Your empire is built on fear," she said. "Fear of your weapons, fear of your punishments, fear of your power. But fear is not loyalty. Fear is not strength. And fear can be overcome. What have you done?" I showed them another way. All these servants and slaves you never noticed. All these conquered people you treated like furniture. I showed them that they don't have to be afraid. I showed them that one person can make a difference. That resistance is possible. Calthor stepped toward her, his fists clenched. "I will crush this rebellion. I will make an example of you and everyone who helped you." "Maybe you will," Elena admitted. "But it won't matter. The spark is already spread. On Earth, my people are fighting. Here on your own ship, your servants are rising. And across your empire, every conquered species is watching. They're waiting to see what happens next. What happens next is your death. Then kill me. It won't change anything. You can kill me, but you can't kill what I represent. You can't kill hope." Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Reports flooded in of systems failing, of guards finding themselves locked out of critical areas, of communication channels being jammed. The rebellion had begun. Calthor looked at Elena with something approaching respect. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "In 400 years, no one has ever challenged me like this." "Then you've been surrounded by the wrong people," Elena replied. "Or maybe you just refuse to listen." The Alpha King turned and strode toward the door, shouting orders to his guards. The battle for the throne of conquest was about to begin. Elena watched him go, then activated her communication device one last time. "This is Commander Hart to all allied forces. The flagship is compromised. The Alpha King is distracted. This is our moment. For Earth, for everyone they've conquered, for the future." She drew the weapon that Kira had hidden for her and moved toward the bridge. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing tall. The war lasted 2 more years. 2 years of battles and bloodshed, of victories and defeats, of hope and despair. But the outcome was decided in those first chaotic hours. When humanity showed the galaxy that conquest was not the end, Elena fought her way to the bridge of the throne of conquest with a handful of loyal servants by her side. They were not soldiers, not warriors. They were cooks and cleaners and maintenance workers. But they believed in something greater than themselves, and that belief made them unstoppable. The Varaxian guards on the bridge were expecting an attack from outside, not from within. When the doors opened and Elena stepped through, weapon raised, they froze in confusion. "Stand down," she ordered. "This ship is no longer under Varaxian control." Some of the guards obeyed. Others reached for their weapons. The fighting was brief and brutal. When it was over, Elena stood at the command console of the mightiest warship in the known galaxy. "Shut down the weapons," she ordered the bridge crew who had surrendered. "Lower the shields. Signal the human fleet that we are not hostile." Calthor arrived minutes later, surrounded by his personal guard. He found the bridge in enemy hands, and his own officers looking to Elena for commands. For a moment, his face showed pure rage. Then something else appeared in his ancient eyes, understanding. "You planned this from the beginning," he said. "From the moment I claimed you as my prize. Every conversation, every question, every act of defiance. It was all part of your strategy." "Not from the beginning," Elena admitted. "At first, I just wanted to survive. But then I saw the truth of your empire. I saw the fear in your servants' eyes. I heard the stories of worlds crushed and species broken. And I knew I had to do something. One woman against an empire of 12,000 years. One woman who showed others that they didn't have to be afraid. That's all it took. That's all it ever takes." Below, on Earth, the tide had turned. Nathan Cole's resistance fighters had captured key positions across the globe. The Varaxian occupation forces, cut off from communication and support, began to surrender or flee. Humans poured out of hiding, armed with weapons salvaged from fallen enemies. Captain Maya Santos commanded the space battle with brilliant precision. Her fleet, aided by the intelligence Elena had provided and the chaos aboard the Varaxian command ships, achieved victory after impossible victory. By the end of the first day, humanity controlled the space around their own world for the first time in a year. But the war was not over. The Varaxian Empire was vast, and reinforcements would come. Elena knew they had won a battle, not the war. "You cannot hold this ship," Calthor said, almost gently. "My fleet will arrive within weeks. They will destroy you and reclaim everything you have taken." "Maybe," Elena replied. "But a lot can change in a few weeks." She was right. The news of the Earth uprising spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On dozens of conquered worlds, subjugated species watched and waited. They saw humans, a young and supposedly primitive species, stand against the Varaxian Empire and survive. They saw servants on the Alpha King's own flagship join the rebellion. They saw hope. The first rebellions began within days. The Delany, who had been conquered for 2,000 years, rose up on their homeworld and captured their colonial governor. The blue-skinned Helix destroyed a Varaxian mining facility and seized the weapons within. A dozen smaller species joined, together to attack supply convoys and disrupt Imperial communications. The Varaxian Empire did not fall in one dramatic moment. It crumbled slowly, piece by piece, as the fear that held it together dissolved. Calthor watched from his captivity as everything he had built came apart. Elena visited him one evening, months after the initial uprising. He was confined to comfortable quarters aboard his own ship, guarded by the same servants who had once been invisible to him. "Your reinforcements never came," she said. They were too busy dealing with rebellions closer to home. My commanders were fools, Calther replied bitterly. They should have crushed these uprisings immediately. They tried. It didn't work. You can't crush an idea with weapons. You taught us that. He looked at her sharply. I taught you nothing. You taught me everything. Every time you dismissed your servants as unimportant, I learned that the overlooked have power. Every time you claimed that strength comes from force, I learned that real strength comes from unity. Every time you said that fear controls empires, I learned that love and hope control them better. Calther was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. I am 472 years old. I have ruled longer than your entire species has existed. And I was defeated by a woman who was my prisoner for less than a year. You weren't defeated by me, Elena said. You were defeated by your own blindness. You saw me as property, as a prize. You never saw me as a person. And because you couldn't see me, you couldn't understand me. That was your fatal mistake. 2 years after the uprising began, representatives from across the galaxy gathered on Earth to form a new government. They called it the Interstellar Coalition, and it was built on principles that were the opposite of everything the Varaxian Empire had stood for. Elena stood before the assembled delegates, representing not just humanity, but all the species who had joined the rebellion she had sparked. Her uniform was simple, without medals or decorations. She did not need symbols of power. Her actions spoke for themselves. I was told I belonged to an empire, she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. I was told my world was finished, my people broken. The Alpha King believed that taking control meant victory. He never understood that you cannot own a human spirit. You cannot conquer a species that refuses to accept defeat. She paused, looking out at the faces of beings from 100 different worlds. Some were tall, some small. Some had silver skin like the Varaxians, others had scales or feathers or fur. But all of them were free. We did not win this war alone. Every species represented here contributed. Every servant who passed secret information, every worker who sabotaged enemy equipment, every ordinary person who refused to give up hope. This victory belongs to all of us. Calther was brought before the coalition to answer for his crimes. He stood tall, even in chains, and faced the beings he had once ruled with absolute power. I have ruled for 4 centuries, he said. I have broken empires older than your species. How did you defeat me? Elena stepped forward to answer. Because you saw me as property, a prize, something to be controlled. You never saw me as a threat. Every human you dismissed, every servant you ignored, every species you thought was beneath you, we were all threats. We always were. You just refused to see it. The coalition voted to dismantle what remained of the Varaxian Empire and establish a new order based on cooperation rather than conquest. Former subjects became equal partners. Ancient grudges were set aside in favor of shared goals. It was not perfect, and there were many challenges ahead. But it was a beginning. Elena declined a position of leadership in the new government. She had never wanted power for its own sake. She had only wanted freedom. Nathan Cole found her in the observation deck of the Resilience, now docked at Earth's rebuilt orbital station. She was staring out at the stars, just as she had done so many times before. But now those stars represented possibility instead of danger. What now? He asked, standing beside her. Elena smiled. A real smile, full of warmth and peace. Now we make sure this never happens again. Not to us, not to anyone. We build a galaxy where people are valued for who they are, not what they can be forced to do. That's a big job. Then it's a good thing there are so many of us. She thought about Kira and the other servants who had risked everything to help her. She thought about the resistance fighters who had died for freedom. She thought about all the ordinary people across the galaxy who had found their courage when it mattered most. The Alpha King had sought to claim a single human. Instead, he had awakened a species that would reshape the galaxy. He had thought that one woman could not make a difference. He had been wrong. Elena took one last look at the stars, then turned and walked away. There was work to do, a future to build. The war was over. The real journey was just beginning.